Hello and welcome to today's Empowercast. Welcome to our audience. I have a very special guest for you today, and this is our 6th episode of our Empowercast, promoting inclusion and helping businesses to become more aware of what they can do to be more inclusive and create a culture of equality, diversity and inclusion. My name is Vicky Docker, Director of Empowered Change, and Empowered Change offers services for organisations around improving, creating an inclusive workplace, developing and progressing talents through consultation, reviewing strategy, designing and delivering development programs like leadership and management programs and bespoke and one-to-one coaching support. These episodes cover my interviewees' lives and their experiences, so it is a real gift to share with you as the audience other people's lived experiences, because it's really hard to understand somebody else and their experience unless you've experienced it yourself. So we allow you to walk into somebody else's shoes for the next sort of 20 minutes or so. And I am proud to give them, all of our guests, a platform to be able to share and reduce people's unintentional ignorance, because we don't know what we don't know. So it's about educating people. And I believe that when we create an inclusive environment at work where everyone can speak up and share their ideas without worrying about what other people think about them, feeling safe, that actually businesses get great innovation, they get great ideas, great diversity of thinking, which ultimately increases engagement and, from a business perspective, increases growth and business results. So, hopefully thinking about some of the points that we cover in these Empowercasts will help you as businesses to challenge yourselves as to what do you do to create an inclusive culture. So on to today's Empowercast. So I'm very excited about my guest today. I am introducing in a moment Tate Smith to you, who I am, as I say, really pleased to introduce to you. I met Tate through a mutual contact earlier on this year, and we met face to face a couple of times, and more recently at the beginning of April for Tate's launch, where he was at Clifford Chance's offices in Canary Wharf to launch his new brand, which he will talk to you about today. So without further ado, I am proud to introduce Tate Smith to you today. He is going to talk to you about his experience transitioning from being a female to a male. This is really relevant because recently we've had the International Day Against Homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. Tate, you're going to have to correct me on that one because I said that wrong, which was the 17th of May, which was a very busy day campaigning. So Tate shines light on the unsaid. 51% of transgender people have hidden their identity at work for fear of discrimination. That's massive. 51% of transgender people have hidden their identity at work. So, Tate, you are an ambassador working with organisations to advise them about trans inclusion, and I'm not going to steal all your thunder, but you go into businesses and advise them. I'm not going to take anything away, but thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us about your journey, Tate, and transitioning from female to male. Tell us a little bit about you and that whole experience, because I know there's a lot in there, so I'm going to jump straight in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I won't bore you to death with my origin story, but it wasn't always known to me as a kid. And in short, I came out at 16 and attempted to socially transition. So dress male, you know, tell everyone my new name is Tate, my pronouns are he, him now. And I just wasn't ready. And there were a couple of other factors. So I went back into the closet for a number of years. And then I began to medically transition, so take hormones at the age of 20. But before that, I started living full time as male around, you know, tail end of 19, going into 20. And I'm now 25. So I've been transitioning for a good 5 years. I recently celebrated my anniversary in April, and I had top surgery, a procedure to masculinize my chest in 2020. So it's been a real journey, but a very exciting one. You know, to living as my full and authentic self. And I'm very happy I made that decision for myself. But most excitingly, during the transition, I started working as a legal secretary, and I did that for a number of years. So I transitioned during the workplaces, had very negative but also very positive experiences, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. And just last year, I decided to go self-employed after speaking alongside my 9 to 5 for a number of years and advocating for the trans community. I really found that there was a gap in the market for someone to come into organizations and advise them and write these policies and give my lived experience rather than rigid terminology training that people might forget the following day. And I found that people were really crying out to hear from a trans man because the representation is so limited in the UK, and actually, come to think of it, probably the world when it comes to speakers. So I took all of those tools and I set up a consultancy last year. Really big jump going from 9 to 5 to freelance, but I did it. And then just this April, in addition to celebrating 5 years, a massive milestone in my transition, I set up a limited company and I hard launched my business, as you say, at Clifford Chance, where it all began as a legal secretary and a speaker and activist. And I've been, yeah, doing really well. Transition, you know, came with a lot of peaks and troughs, but it was really good. And now I get to focus on my business, which is really important to me because the first 5 years are really the formative years of any trans person's transition. It's like a second puberty. So now I'm at that stage in my life where I'm like, right, that's all done now. Now I can focus on giving back to my community and actually helping organizations who they just need an extra tiny bit of support when it comes to trans inclusion, because people are afraid to say the wrong thing now, and I'm happy to help them. And I'm also confident enough to do so. Whereas in the beginning of my transition, I probably wasn't so confident, but now I feel ready to give back what I've learned, you know, over the last 5 years.
I've said to you on many occasions that we've spoken, you know, you're an absolute inspiration because going through that journey yourself, that's huge. And then talking publicly and sharing a very emotive subject, that's something you've personally gone through so early in that journey as well, and then creating a business to be able to help other people, help businesses, help individuals going through. I just think that's absolutely phenomenal. Well done, you.
Thank you so much.
You touched on there about you'll come on to some of the challenges that you face. So tell us a little bit about what challenges you did face as you were transitioning, or things that you see that are, you know, reactions and challenges.
Sure. So the immediate challenges for me were lack of policy. I found that any organization I was in that didn't have a policy for what transitioning at work would look like did not know how to deal with me. And I think it's really important that organizations lay that groundwork, get that blueprint in, you know, what is it going to look like transitioning in your workplace? Can you change your name on your security pass and your HR system, you know, things like that. And also I found that where organizations had no out role models or no thriving and busy LGBT plus network, or had started having those inclusive conversations already, so getting in a trainer, to teach people about inclusive language, or hosting webinars, lunch and learn, celebrating Pride or Trans Awareness Week. These are the barriers that I came across. So where this inclusive culture wasn't being fostered, that meant that people didn't know how to deal with trans people. So as a result, I had too many unsupportive line managers and HR teams, which really surprised me. And in some cases, you know, I was told to double down on my transness, so stop speaking so openly. I had one organisation extend my probation period because I was about to start hormones and they didn't know what was going to happen to me. Those were their words. So they said, "You're really good at your job, but we just don't know what's going to happen to you. So we're going to extend your probation," which really wasn't helpful to me, especially when I was fresh to my transition, about to go on hormones. You know, what I really needed was work to be like a support network, a found family for me. But unfortunately, this organization wasn't that for me. And then as I moved through other organizations that maybe did have those policies, had already had those existing conversations. And for the most part, you know, the employees were really engaged, super inclusive. You're always going to get those nuanced conversations, those conversations in the coffee area where perhaps people slip up, and that's okay. But it's where people go a step further, um, you know, into transphobic territory where they dead name you. So they use a trans person's previous name on purpose, or they misgendered me. So they would call me she instead of he. And obviously that was not good for me, especially early in my transition when I'm just trying to get on with my day job and not have to think about my transition, the physical changes 24/7. So there would be people who weren't supportive, but what would happen is that I would find that some HR teams would escalate that appropriately, take it really serious. So they ended up being the allies that I needed, where I wasn't so confident and probably wasn't so vocal that I could stand up for myself. You know, I was very much of the mind that, oh, I'm scared that people think I'm trans. Whereas I should have been going, no, who cares if I'm trans? But, you know, I was early in my transition. So, of course, I wouldn't be thinking like that. So those were the obstacles that I faced. But I was very fortunate that as I grew into my transition and obviously worked and progressed in my career at the same time, it got easier for me to stand up for myself. And I think workplaces responded to that confidence. And also where I was speaking openly about it, that was also educating people as well. But like I say, with testosterone and taking the hormones, the confidence increased. So it meant that I was able to, you know, vocalize how I was feeling and say, no, this behavior is wrong. This is what you should say instead. But it's very important that workplaces get all of this in hand before a trans person comes out, so that any trans person that comes out in your organization is then not the go-to person, the encyclopedia. You know, all the problems, all the policy changes are put on this one individual.
I think that's a really good point, Tate. And, you know, thank you for sharing all of that. A lot of rich information in there. I suppose for organisations that haven't had somebody in their business who has transitioned, then they could be easily, particularly that the HR team, if they haven't had that experience, could be thinking, oh, what do we need to do? And suddenly they're kind of on the back foot. And that's one of the things that I love about your business, is because you can be brought in rather than going to somebody else who's experienced it. You can be brought in as an expert to go, actually, this is what you need to have in place. This would have helped myself. I've lived it. I know what that experience is. And I think that that's one of your USPs that you obviously bring with you in your business to help advise organisations, because it is hard. And I know when we were at Clifford Chance for your launch party, I noticed that they had the unisex toilets, and even something as simple as that, if nobody advises, then how do you know sort of what options you've got that you could be offering as an employer?
Exactly, and that's why it's always so important to bring in that expertise, you know, you would bring in lawyers and accountants for whatever you needed. So if you want to, you know, forward trans inclusion in your organization, you have to bring in trans people. And this is why I set up that consultancy, because I appreciate it's not always easy to find us. Perhaps you don't know what our offering is. So I make it very clear that, you know, that expert advice on things like gender neutral bathrooms, organizational policy, or maybe implementing some really dynamic initiatives like reverse mentoring or a graduate scheme to attract trans or LGBT talent as a whole. You know, these are things that I can assist with. And I found that luckily corporates and obviously other businesses have really responded to that. And I've been able to help make that change and then inspire other organizations, probably within the same industries, to do the same. So it's had a really cool ripple effect.
Mm. And I think one of the things when you and I met up was there'd been an incident where there'd been a transphobia hate crime, and it was somebody was even at school, and I remember thinking to myself, crikey, I didn't know that this sort of thing went on. And I think there's quite a lack of awareness in general about some of the reactions that people have when somebody's transitioning or transitioned. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about some examples of hate crimes for transphobia or some of your experiences.
Sure. So, in terms of my experiences, I haven't had anything directly happen to me in terms of hate crime, but I have experienced transphobic behavior, which I've just alluded to, you know, within the workplace. Online, for some reason, I have been lucky. I haven't been the victim of trolling, but I'm very well aware of that. And that's because I'm a trans man, and that isn't alien to people. Whereas we see a lot of hate crime and transphobia being directed towards trans women because people don't take the time to understand them. I think what's really important for your listeners to be aware of is that hate crime against trans people has risen 186% in the last 5 years and 11% in the last year alone. Now, those statistics are last updated October 2023. So I dread to think what they're going to be this coming October, especially since in February we saw two school children aged 16 be jailed for the murder of a trans schoolgirl. And then a couple of days after that sentencing, we saw a couple of teenagers be charged for the attempted murder of another trans schoolgirl at a birthday party and ice skating rink in London. So these things are very, very present. Also, we've got Pride Month coming up in June. Last June, I had friends who were attacked coming back from Pride at bus stops, you know, in London, which is supposed to be this metropolitan city where we are inclusive of everybody, particularly LGBTQ plus people. So I am quite fearful of what's going to happen this coming Pride. I don't obviously want to be too negative, but I would be doing a disservice to anybody if I didn't reference these statistics. So what I would say is be aware of these statistics. Please educate others on them. You know, you can go on Office for National Statistics, or you can go on Stonewall. That's a great resource if you need to signpost people. And think about what you can be doing as an individual to call that out. Don't be a bystander if you see it going on in the street, and make sure you're not perpetuating that behavior as well. If you don't understand someone's experiences, go away and Google it. There's no excuse. You can listen to a podcast, you can watch a film on Netflix, or you can go away and watch a TED talk or follow LGBTQ plus content creators on Instagram, you know, activists and speakers and consultants like me on LinkedIn. You know, wise up, because I think that's going to help you call out your behavior that you might have some unconscious bias, but then also God forbid, if you come across any transphobic hate crime in the street or perhaps in your workplace, you can go, hang on, that's not right. And this is what you should be saying instead, or you can step in and prevent it from escalating.
It's quite staggering stats that you shared there, Tate,
Mm.
and so upsetting to hear that people are targeted and such awful things, and obviously with the death as well, and just a completely shocking behaviour through people being unaware. Thank you for sharing all of that. So what examples have you had then from good employers where they have helped and supported you and others?
So they always have a policy in place, or have done for some time, setting out what coming out as trans in that workplace would look like. So that would be considering things like changing your name and your sex or gender identity on your HR system, setting out a communications plan. How are you going to communicate that to your team and your clients if you're in a client facing role? Things like facilities, bathrooms and changing facilities, dress code as well, because some organisations in the city do still have a old stereotypical male female dress code, which is just so outdated, especially post COVID. Just dress for your day, and that includes everybody regardless if they're trans or not. But also going one step further, so looking at if anybody is being seconded to a client, to a country where it may be illegal to be trans, how are you going to protect them? Chaperones, things like that. So really considering everything, looking at it holistically. And then obviously we know that policies can only do so much. So hosting events, and all year round, not just limited to visibility days like Trans Day of Visibility on the 31st of March, Pride Month in June, or Trans Awareness Week, which is 13th to 19th of November. I love it when I see organisations take a moment's silence or commemorate Trans Day of Remembrance, which is on the 20th of November. Now, that day is a more somber day rather than a happy-go-lucky visibility day, in that it's a time to think about our elders and our trailblazers who may have lost their lives to the cause, because hate crime statistics around the world and murder rates against trans people are very, very high. So it's a really good time to reflect on that and what more we can be doing as allies, but also paying tribute to those trailblazers who laid the path that I could follow as a trans person. So I love it when I see events going on for that, whether that's webinars, lunch and learns, fireside chats. Really cool, really dynamic. You can't go wrong if you're hosting events all year round. But also putting in bespoke initiatives, so policy audits. Okay, I've got a trans policy in place, but I need to check the inclusive language on my other policies. Could that also affect trans people? So menopause, that impacts trans men like me because we take testosterone that suppresses the estrogen, so it brings on early menopause. Maternity, there are trans men that still get pregnant, may choose to birth their own children. So you need to make sure your policy addresses that. Right? It's not just women, women, women. It doesn't mean that you have to eradicate the word women when it comes to menopause or maternity. You just want to add "and trans people" to the end of it, and considering other things like that, like family leave, parental leave, IVF, surrogacy, if that's something your private healthcare benefits covers as well. It's really important that you cover all bases, because trans people are affected by more than just transitioning. So that's when I think of an organization getting something right, that's what I think of, putting in those policies, updating them, doing regular audits on a yearly basis, hosting events all year round, but also showing up for the community, whether that's doing pro bono work in the community, volunteering with charities that support trans people, setting up a specific network perhaps that could run alongside your active LGBT plus network if you have one, specifically for trans people and their allies. You know, anytime you create a safe space for trans people, that's how you know you're doing it right. And also when senior leadership get involved as well, I love to see senior leaders, C-suite executives send out firm-wide emails when it is these visibility days, showing up for trans people, letting everybody know they love the community. This is what we're doing to further trans inclusion within the organisation, and this is a very safe space for you to come out in, and I support you, because it sets the tone, you know, it filters down. And whether you like it or not, as a senior leader, people do look to your behavior and model their own on it. So if you've got those visible role models, and the visibility goes far beyond emails, you've got your intranet, your SharePoint, which is up to date with resources, you've got recordings of webinars, you've got that policy, you've got links you can signpost line managers to, so that they're up to speed with supporting their teams. Those are really, really great ways. And these are all things that I've experienced as a trans person. I've seen implemented in my own workplaces and through my own clients, and they have been really, really successful.
Your passion just absolutely shines through.
Thank you.
And I just have to touch on one of the points that you made. So many points in there, but I remember you and I both having the conversation about menopause, and I knew that it affected you know, people who transition from female to male. But when you and I started comparing notes, that was quite amusing. And I know that I trained to be a menopause champion previously, and it was always like, you know, supporting women and transgender community. And it was great when I met you, because we were actually able to have a conversation about that, which most people are completely unaware of. So that was interesting. You've sort of sidelined already some of my final question for you, because you've just talked about loads of things that organisations can do to support their people. Just briefly, Tate, I'd really like you to have a platform to tell us about what you do in your organisation, how you help organisations, and how people can get in touch with you.
Thank you. So the things that I mentioned are very much the things that I offer through my consultancy. So I'm a speaker and consultant. So what that means is I deliver speaking engagements about my lived experiences as a trans man. So that suits whatever format you need, whether that's a lunch and learn, a fireside chat, a workshop, or a keynote speech. And then on the consultancy side, I specialize in organizational policy. So whether that's transitioning at work or other policies that may have gendered language in them, such as menopause, maternity, and other family policies like parental leave, IVF, surrogacy. And I also support on strategies, activating campaigns, and support on larger projects. So, for instance, I've recently just advised Instep, an apprenticeship provider, on eliminating gendered language and gender bias in their Women in Leadership program, which hasn't been updated since the 80s. So that was really cool. And I've also just advised Anglo American on their first ever UK-wide transgender policy, which was a real privilege. And I also help with those difficult conversations as well. You know, if you need to get buy-in from C-suite executives, I'm your man. And if you need to, you know, push for your private medical insurance providers to cover gender affirming surgery, that's also something that I've helped with as well. So it's a lot that I offer, but it's really cool. It's very, very varied, and I'm always happy to help anybody with any specific initiatives they have, or however bespoke it may be, however early or advanced you are in your trans inclusion journey. I'm really happy to help you, because like I say, I've come out, I've lived those experiences, both positive and negative, and now I've set up my own business. And I've been speaking and consulting for a number of years, whilst also working in law. So it's definitely something that I'm happy to help anybody with.
Thank you, Tate. And I know that we're going to have some, certainly at least one more follow on later this year, because you've got so many great conversations to sort of share information about, as we touched on there, the menopause, but also male privilege, things that you've spotted when you transition. So, and I think you've got your own podcast on your website, haven't you? So if people want to listen and hear from you, then they can learn more as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have my own podcast yet. Maybe there's scope for that in the future, but I do have plenty more podcasts that you can check out on my site, which is just tatesmith.uk. So you can find articles I've contributed to and written. You've got podcasts, you've got examples of my speaking engagements. You'll see my clientele as well. You'll also notice that obviously there won't be all of the speaking engagements with those clients, because as you can imagine, they're recorded internally and shared privately, but you'll definitely see a lot of the cool work that I've been supporting, as well as charity work and advocacy that I do as well, because it's not just corporates that I support.
Lovely. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to you, Tate,
thank you for having me,
sharing your story and giving us a flavour today of how organisations can help. You really do, you know, put the light on helping people to understand what isn't said and shining that light very brightly. So thank you, Tate.
Thank you.
For all of those of you who have listened or watched to this particular episode, thank you. And if you would like support as listeners or people who have watched to create an inclusive workplace, reviewing your strategy around equality, diversity, inclusion in general, looking at activities to raise awareness in your workplace, then do contact me. My name is Vicky, and my email is vicky@empoweredchange.co.uk. And my website is www.empoweredchange.co.uk. So again, thank you, Tate. And we will look forward to hearing from you in a later edition later on this year.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.